Good morning, everyone. This is Billy from Bookstore Romance Day, and I want to thank you all for getting up to be here with us this morning. This is our first virtual event of Bookstore Romance Day proper. We did do a kickoff event last night. So thank you all again for joining us. We are going to be traveling further abroad and talking about romance that's set outside of the usual suspects of the US and Western Europe. And your moderator for today is Denise Phillips of Gathering Voluemes in Ohio. And I'm going to turn this over to Denise. Thank you.
Thank you, Billy, and thank you so much for all you do to set up Bookstore Romance Day. As someone who helps host a in-person author festival, like I can't even imagine trying to manage everything online. So thank you for all you do. And thank you everyone for joining us today, especially our esteemed authors. So I'm going to run through some quick introductions of who is here with me today, and then we'll get into the heart of the meeting. So we have, and this is in no particular order. I usually alphabetize things, and I don't think I even alphabetized things today. So we have Jodie McAlister, PhD, who is an author and academic from Kiama, Australia. Did I pronounce that right?
Kiama.
Say it again.
Kiama,
Australia. I was so worried about pronouncing names properly. I should have paid more attention. Her academic work focuses on the history of love, sex, women, and girls, popular culture, and fiction. And it means that reading romance novels and watching The Bachelor is technically work for her. She is currently a senior lecturer in writing, literature, and culture in Deakin. Did I at least say that right?
Yep, that one's right.
Okay, Deakin University of Melbourne. Not Here to Make Friends is her debut novel in the US, I believe, and is a romance set on the set of a reality dating show called Marry Me, Juliet. This is your US debut, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
so you've got the US cover there. This is the Australian cover.
Oh, they're pretty close.
Yeah, they're pretty similar.
And I believe when I read it, because when I was putting your bio together, you actually reference your job in the book, right? You reference that somebody has your job and it's such a cool job, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it. Okay. And then Maggie North is also with us here today. Maggie is from Ottawa, Canada, which I believe I know how to pronounce because I'm in Ohio and grew up in Michigan. With a man she met in 9th grade, their kid, and a rotating cast of hypoallergenic aquarium friends. Her hobbies include long distance open water swimming, saving the world, and being relentlessly Canadian. She enjoys being autistic and a lot more since she received her diagnosis as an adult. Rules for Second Chances is her debut novel, a unique novel that asks, can true love happen twice with the same person? Did I do okay with all the pronunciations?
No, you were perfect.
Okay,
excellent
good.
job.
Again, I've been to Canada a number of times. I was like, I'm pretty sure I can pronounce things properly. And okay, this is going to be the one. Pyae mo Thet war. Did I really do okay? Yep. Or we did okay.
No, you did great.
Was born and raised in Myanmar. She currently shares a home and her food with her dogs, Gus and Missy. Her debut novel, I Did Something Bad, is a swoony adventure rom-com where a journalist and a movie star find themselves teaming up to cover up a murder. And it's not released yet, so I don't have a copy here to share. Do you have a copy to share? Do you have a cover?
I have, if I can do this gracefully without, there we go. Yeah, so this is the US cover, and this is actually the UK cover, which comes out in November. So they're like sisters. So yeah.
Yay. And then last but not least, or finally, I don't know what the best way to say it is, MC Vaughan. I think I pronounced that correctly. Correct? Is that correct?
You got it. Yep.
Okay. MC Vaughan is a Baltimore-based author of humorous contemporary romance. You'll root for her characters as they fall for their perfect people and simultaneously want to throttle them for being big dummies about love. She grew up in a house crowded with family, friends, books, music, and the occasional ghost. Currently, she lives in Maryland with her husband and 3 delightful kids. And this is my cover of Romancing Miss Stone. So, Thank you all again for being here today. Did I miss anything, or is there anything you want to add before I jump into my questions for you? Okay, so we'll start with the first question. Again, not ordered in any specific order. So we're here today to discuss your romance novels set in faraway locales, at least far away from me. Pyae, let's start with your novel, I Did Something Bad. Since it's releasing in October, I unfortunately am less prepared to discuss it than the other novels we're going to be discussing. But my understanding is that it is set in Myanmar, and it is a thriller romance that involves a movie star and a journalist who are attacked and work together to try and figure out who the attacker was while learning more about each other as well. Is that correct? Or is there more you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's like a very good condensed version. The way I've been describing it is, so the main character, Kin, she's a journalist and she's fresh off of a divorce. She's assigned this big article on like this really famous actor, Tyler, who's in Myanmar to shoot his next big movie. And on the movie set, on the first night, this stranger attacks Kin and she accidentally murders him. And then the book is them like trying to make sure Kin doesn't get caught, and then also trying to figure out if she was targeted, and if so, why. And so it's like, if you like crime with your romance or like action thriller, when I pitched it to my agent, I was like, I want to write a rom-com with a murder. So if that sounds like something that you'd be into, that's I Did Something Bad.
And was there something in real life that inspired the idea?
I think I just really I loved books like Dial for Aunties by Jesse Q. Sutanto and like How to Kill Your Family by Bella Mackie. So I just wanted to write. I was like, I really want to do something with the murder, but I'm a big romance reader, so I knew that was the genre I wanted to be in. And I just was like, I don't know what this would look like if I put them together, but I wanted to try.
Oh, so cool. It sounds so good. I'm so excited. So we're going to move from a movie set in Myanmar to a reality television show set in Australia. So is it okay if I call you Jodie instead of Doctor? I feel like I should say Dr. Jodie.
Yeah, no. Here is a point of cultural difference. Australians are much less kind of hung up on the doctor surname thing than I think people are in America. So please just call me Jodie.
Okay, so Jodie, I did have a chance to read Not Here to Make Friends, and I must say, much like I anticipate I Did Something Bad being reading like a thriller, Not Here to Make Friends read very much like a thriller to me as well, because I was like, what is the intention? Throughout the entire book, I was trying to figure out what was the intention. And I found myself rooting for the character that I think is being referred to as the villain in a lot of the synopses, but I never really felt like they were a villain. So did you have a lot of joy in writing Lily Fireball? And did you, in your head, think of her as villainous?
Yeah. So before I answer your question, I want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you tonight, for me, from the traditional and unceded lands of the Kaurna people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. And I am on Kaurna country in Adelaide for the Romance Writers of Australia conference. I've just come straight from the conference dinner. So if people like come stumbling by my hotel room really loudly and start screaming, sorry. But okay, let's talk about Not Here to Make Friends. So Lily Fireball in this book is the villain on this reality dating show, which is like, it's The Bachelor. It's called Marry Me Juliet, but it's The Bachelor. And she's very consciously made herself into the villain. She's not the victim of a villain edit. She is doing this on purpose. And so consequently, when I was writing her and also writing her backstory in the other two books in the series, I never thought of her as a villain because she is my favorite. I thought of her as a kind of anti-heroine. So the reason I didn't necessarily think of her as a like heroine is because I think sometimes in romance, the term heroine is bound up with likability. And I never really intended Lily to be a particularly likable character. And the same with the hero in her book, Murray. He's a reality TV producer. They're both deeply Machiavellian and manipulative people. They both have sort of fundamentally broken moral compasses on a a broad level, they've got quite pure goals. They want to make a more inclusive season of reality television. But on a personal level, they will absolutely ruin anyone they come across without any qualms. So they're kind of an anti-hero and an anti-heroine falling in love. I sometimes call it morally grey grumpy meets amoral sunshine. But because of this, I thought a lot about tension. And instead of likability, I thought about how to make these two people fascinating. How to take two people who both have very similar skill sets, they are both Machiavellian masterminds, and make them kind of scrape up against each other in a way that drives romantic tension, but also drives absolute chaos on the set of this reality television show.
Well, you did a fabulous job. And as someone who didn't get to read the earlier books, since this is my first experience, it works well even not knowing necessarily the backstory through the whole book, if that makes sense. It really, like, it provided a lot of tension to me because I think not knowing any of that backstory, I'm like, I had no idea why she was doing what she was doing, and that made it almost a mystery to me as I read it. Like, why is she, so it works well even for those of us who don't get the joy of having the other two books available to us yet.
Oh, yeah. Good, because I hoped it would work like that. So that's very heartening, actually.
Okay, so now we are going to head to the mountains and wilderness of Canada. Maggie, in all the bios I could find about you, they mentioned your many skills: anesthesiology, fish raising, crisis simulation, to name a few, but they didn't mention camping, hiking. I did mention, I think, open water swimming. My family does a lot of camping and hiking. Should I have automatically realized that because you're an open water swimmer, you also do all the other outdoorsy stuff?
I think probably I should have just written a better bio that went with my book a bit more. I feel like Canada, I mean, it has a reputation for being, cold and wild, which is great and also true. It is urban, like I live in a city. But my family, I guess I would describe my family as swashbuckling. So we did spend weeks at a time off the grid in the islands of BC, both the Gulf Islands and on the north coast, Haida Gwaii, which is an archipelago off the coast of BC, which would be the traditional territory of the Haida people. Actually, I meant to say Jodie did a great job with her introduction, and I wanted to say, good morning from the traditional territories where my book is set, which would be Squamish and Lil'wat people. Anyway, so we also, my grandparents had a farm north of Whistler, and the book is set in a very sort of loosely fictionalized version of Whistler and Pemberton, BC, which is a really amazing biome, kind of unique. There's a lot of really cool species there, like, bears, cougars, but also some really unique salamanders and snakes. And so I guess you could say, yeah, I've done it all in terms of the outdoors.
My family and I just got back from vacationing in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Technically, we could have gone across to Canada, but my kids' passports are expired, and my daughter turns 18 next month. So I was like, I'm not buying you another kid's passport before you turn 18. So we're waiting. But it's funny because as a reader and as a bookseller, there's so many books where they're trying to get people off grid somehow, just so that the phones aren't the easy answer to everything, I think. But we truly did not have service through most of our week vacation. And I was like, this is like the last frontier, like where you can truly set a book and not have any connection to the outside world. So I in my head, when I was reading your book, it was very similar to the UP of Michigan that I'm used to seeing. So
yeah, I think it would be very similar, like North America, like that kind of 49th parallel, sort of northern part of it is all, you'd recognize the place where it's set. Add a few extra tall rocks and you're all good.
Excellent. So MC, is MC okay? Or do you have a
great.
preferred?
No, go for it.
Okay. So MC, your exotic locale is not in Maryland where you are based. Romancing Miss Stone is set mainly in Belize. What inspired your setting choice?
Really, there were two inspirations. The first is that when we graduated from college, my then boyfriend, now husband, was staying with his dad's childhood friend who was scuba certified and insisted that in exchange for free rent that my husband also become scuba certified. And so they did that. They did not go to Belize, but he often spoke about Belize being his favorite place to go scuba diving and snorkeling and things like that. And so that put it on my radar. But the second inspiration for it was that the idea for this came to me sort of mid-travel lockdowns and things like that. And I was sort of desperate to get out of my house, and that wasn't possible. So I took myself on a mental journey to places far away and exotic, and Belize, again, because of the seed that had been planted ages ago, I thought I would check it out a little bit more deeply than I had previously. And now having researched it, would desperately like to go there myself.
Well, as someone who's never been to Belize, you did an excellent job for me reading, because I really truly felt like they were there. So
It's a big shout out to all of the YouTubers who filmed their vacations. So if you ever think you're silly for doing that, this author thanks you for having done that.
nice. Okay, so back to Jodie. While I believe Not Here to Make Friends is your, oh, we already discussed this. But the whole Marry Me Juliet book series that's available, I believe, I know obviously in Australia, but I believe all of Europe as well. Is that correct?
Some parts of Europe, not other parts of Europe.
Oh,
Subrights are complicated.
interesting. Is there any talk of them being available in the US market soon?
So all three of them are available digitally in the US, but the reason that this one, Not Here to Make Friends, got picked up was because it was reviewed by Olivia Waite in the New York Times. And for many, many years, like these are my fifth, sixth, and seventh novels, respectively, I've been trying to sell books into the US, and the feedback I've been getting is too Australian, too Australian, too Australian. I don't know what that means, actually. Granted, maybe as an Australian, I'm not in a great position to know what that means. But when this one was reviewed in the New York Times, suddenly maybe it wasn't too Australian anymore. So if this one does well, then the publisher Atria has got kind of an option on these two. So please buy this one, because these two might make it into print. But I can tell you that I have just sold my new book, which is coming out in May next year, into the US. So you'll be able to get your hands on that one.
Excellent. Maggie, I just kind of pivoting or adding to that, again, we're very close to the bridge to Canada here in the Toledo area. So we do have Canadian authors that come to the bookstore, and I hear the same from them quite a lot too, that they get told books are too Canadian, or, that they need to take their book and move it to an American setting. Do you get that a lot as well?
I feel like maybe I'm coming at a very privileged time. I will say that my agent did ask my editor when they were acquiring the book, do we need to reset this in the United States? It was always a consideration that an American audience would not necessarily really identify with a Canadian book. But I think Carly Fortune has cracked that wide open with her big bestsellers that are set in various Canadian locales, where also the Canadian locale is a big part of the story. So I'm hoping that I can ride Carly's coattails a little bit and open up the Canadian frontier, so to speak. Yeah.
Rules for Second Chances is an Own Voices novel, correct?
Yep.
Liz is neurodiverse, as are you, correct? Okay. As an introvert, I really related to Maggie's struggles at work with not being appreciated for her introvert work as much as the extroverts are appreciated for their extrovert work, even though I've never been identified as neurodiverse. Do you find yourself often having to explain or feeling the need to write what exactly makes something neurodiverse or not neurodiverse?
I think, yeah, I mean, there have been obviously some trailbreakers in terms of neurodiverse romance in particular. Helen Huang comes to mind, Chloe Lisa. So I'm not the first, which is great, but I do find there is a burden of explaining my identity to people. And especially, I think the way autism has been represented in the media has been very one note. And I think I think the example people know is Rain Man, where, you know, the autistic person is white, he is male, he is highly intelligent, or maybe even a savant. He is a burden to his family. He's maybe even a punishment to his family. He's isolated. And to represent the diversity of autistic people is really the challenge now, where what you get, like, especially as a woman who is autistic, is, you know, you don't look autistic. You're not what I thought an autistic person would look or act like. And if you were autistic, I would know. And so I do find I end up explaining, you know, the spectrum of autism, the diversity of autistic traits, and doing that work. And I don't mind doing it. You know, it's great to get out there and to, you know, represent the autistic community. It is sometimes, it feels like a heavy burden. And I think a lot of marginalized authors would agree, when you're writing representation in a field where there hasn't been much representation, it feels like you really have to do a great job for everybody. It feels like you really have to write an autistic character who represents us all. And it's not possible, but I'm just hoping for, you know, more marginalized voices to get in there and show different kinds of, all kinds of marginalized characters. So the burden on individualized marginalized characters and authors is a little bit smaller.
Thank you. Well, thank you for what you're doing as well. With I think a lot of times, again, I'm, you know, a random white woman, but I think a lot of times I cringe because it feels like we expect everybody to explain their situation to us, to a point that it must get very frustrating to be asked the same things over and over again. But thank you for sharing with us. And thank you to everybody in the chat. I can't really read every single chat, but thank you for everybody in the chat. I see a lot of comments about either reading the books we're talking about today, having read them, have them on your TBR, even though, not, I shouldn't say even though, but reading books set in locales that aren't America. And hopefully we can get more of these books in people's hands and sold, and therefore more agents and publishers picking them up. So thank you everyone for the comments. Okay, MC, your bio has an equally diverse set of experiences. Maggie's sports marketing, toy production, software development. I know I saw. However, archaeology was not on any of the lists that I saw. But I did see a bio that mentioned that a dinner with friends led to a conversation about romancing the stone, which led to you coming up with romancing Miss Stone. Is this how most of your novel ideas occur? Are they generally like lightning bolts that hit in the middle of a dinner with friends?
They often are, actually. I think what happens for me is I will usually imagine how two people meet and start to figure out their personalities from there. But it always starts with the meet cute and where it can go after that. This particular book, I'd had the idea of sort of a gender flipped, or at least with the movies and books and television that I consumed through my childhood and adolescence, it was always the guy who knew how to solve problems and things like that. And my personal experience has been that may be true, but a lot of the women I know are pretty capable people, and will often take the lead on problem solving and figuring out how to get themselves out of a jam and things like that. So combining those two things, the conversation where we're all talking about how much we loved romancing the stone, is really where the idea came from.
Nice. Very well executed as well.
Thank you.
Pyae, along with I Did Something Bad, you have authored an essay collection titled You've Changed. Can you explain the difference, if there's a difference, between the process of sitting down to write a novel versus the process of planning and executing an essay collection?
Yeah, so that's my the essay You've Changed. The pink one's the UK, the blue one's the US cover. If any of you want to branch out into nonfiction. I think I was just talking to someone about this yesterday. I think as writers, in my experience, every writer I know is like, we always have the same sorts of themes that we write, that we like keep circling back to, I feel. And for me, that was true like with nonfiction and fiction. I'm also really bad at plotting. So whether I'm writing an essay or I'm writing a novel, I can't plot, I can't outline. My agent once made me outline, and then she was like, okay, this is, let's not do this again, because we both were just like, this isn't working. So I'm kind of the same when I'm writing fiction or nonfiction. I just sit down and I have a vague idea of what I'm going to be writing, like what scene or what essay, but sometimes I'm still surprised by what happens. I don't really like plan that far ahead. I will say that the biggest difference and this was like one of the biggest difficulties as well when I started writing novels, was realizing that I could make things up. Because obviously in nonfiction, you've got fact checkers, it's like there you've got references, like citations. It's very like you need to get your facts right. And then I remember when I sent the first draft of I Did Something Bad to my agent, and in her edits, she was like, oh, what if we got rid of this character? What if they do this instead of this? And my brain couldn't comprehend that you could just make people do things and like just change how it was, and you didn't have to stick to like, no, but this is how it happened. I was like, oh, I can't just make them not do this. And that was really difficult for me to like wrap my head around at first, but once I did, it was very liberating and it was really fun, because I was like, okay, the whole point of fiction, right, is to make stuff up, and I really like was able to lean into that. But that was definitely difficult at first, because like my nonfiction brain was like, no, you can't change things. Like that's just how it is. And I had to like retrain my brain to be like, no, you can change things. You can't just make people do whatever they want to do.
So in your essay collection, you've changed. Is it more personal to write an essay than to write a novel, do you find?
Yeah, definitely. I always say that the reason I like switched to fiction was because I was kind of emotionally exhausted from writing a personal essay collection. But I also, there are like anyone who knows me in real life will notice traces of, and I think speaking to fiction writers, like traces of me, my life in I Did Something Bad as well. I think like all writers kind of do that. Like for instance, Kin, initially, she was the main character. She was supposed to be a bodyguard instead of a journalist. But I used to be a journalist, and I was like, well, I could just make her like give her a job that I already know really well, because I don't know any bodyguards. So that's why like I made her a journalist. So yeah, so like on paper, You've Changed is definitely like much more personal, but I Did Something Bad definitely just has traces of like my real life in it as well.
Maggie, in Rules for Second Chances, Liz starts out in the book celebrating a party with her husband, and then decides maybe she no longer wants to be with her husband. And I think there's a lot, and again, romance is definitely not my expertise, so I apologize if I'm coming from this from an ignorant area. There's a lot of like breakup and makeup books that I know of, but I don't know of a lot of books that are like that are married couples. And again, I may be coming from a place of ignorance on this, but what made you decide that they were already married? They weren't fiancés, they weren't dating, they were married.
So I will start by saying that yes, the marriage in crisis trope is less used in romance. I think a lot of people are afraid of it just because it sort of it pushes the boundaries of the happily ever after, where you want to believe that the couple, gets married or commits to each other and happily ever after. So I wrote this book during the pandemic, and what sparked that aspect of it was a news article I read about how many couples were struggling in their marriages and could not access marriage counseling traditionally because the demand for psychiatric and psychological services was so high. And I thought, what do you do? Like, what do you do if you're stuck together and you are struggling and there's no help? What if there was, for example, a manual where you could, repair your marriage through exercises? And I had signed up to do an improv comedy course with my sister. It was canceled because of the pandemic, but I had researched improv because that's me. And I discovered it was a lot like high fidelity medical crisis simulation, which I used to instruct. And in that, it's creative. It leaves a lot of room for unexpected things to happen. And you can really learn a lot. And it's really all about, listening and, decoding patterns in situations. So I was like, well, what if there was a couple struggling in their marriage who did a wacky improv comedy themed marriage rehab book? And it ended. I think it's less scary in terms of a marriage in trouble than a lot of people are worried that it is. I kind of love it. I don't know.
You did an excellent job. It worked very
Thank
well.
you.
So for the audience, I guess, I hope that's the right term, in the Zoom call, I have a kind of general question for everyone, but I haven't seen any questions come up in the chat, but I'm kind of keeping a side eye on it. But send in some questions. So we'll do, because I did leave time and want to make sure everybody gets a chance to ask questions they want to ask. So I'll be going back to the chat to look for questions after this next set. So owning a bookstore, we do a lot of author events. We have one coming up this afternoon. And I often hear from authors that once their book is released and they have to do all the work around the PR and the tour and the book events, but they also feel like you kind of have to set that book aside and work feverishly on the next. So I wanted to ask each author about what's coming up next, because in my mind, that's what you're working more feverishly on. So Maggie, we'll start with you. What is coming up next for you?
So next summer 2025 is a companion book to Rules for Second Chances. There is one character in particular in Rules for Second Chances who everybody really, really loves. He's a big soft cinnamon roll, and he will be getting his own book for book 2. So it's set in a like very similar setting, like same town, very nearby. I'm not exactly sure what I can reveal about it yet, but there's lots of niche outdoor sports and adventures.
Excellent. Yay. I feel like there's not enough outdoor sports out there. There's a lot of sports right now. It seems very popular, at least in our bookstore, a lot of the sports books. But as a mom who has 2 scouts and who takes our kids camping a lot, and do a lot of the outdoor hiking and stuff, I feel like that's a good niche that we need to expand on.
Yeah, exactly. Whitewater canoeing, like hockey romance, but different.
Yes. Nice. Pyae, what is next for you?
So I am just turning in like 3rd round of edits for my next book that will come out next year. We finalized the cover just a few weeks ago, and it's another like action thrillery as well. If you've watched The Lost City with Sandra Bullock and Channing Tatum, it's like I pitched it as The Lost City meets Book Lovers by Emily Henry. So it's like bookish as well. I'm very excited, and I'm also actually starting a PhD this fall in creative writing. So we were doing a adaptation of Persuasion by Jane Austen as well. So and looking at contemporary Austen adaptations by Asian writers. So I'm just gonna be just more immersed in romance.
Oh, so cool. MC, I'm pretty sure I've already seen the announcement about the second Belize Dreams book. I think Destination Weddings and Other Disasters.
That's right.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you tell us about it?
Sure. So I've been invited to some destination weddings and wasn't able to really attend because I had small children at the time and things like that. And I started to wonder whether or not people put together destination weddings as a means to thin down the invitation or the guest list, really. But that's just my personal pet theory. But it features the younger sister of the heroine from Romancing Miss Stone, and she and her high school bully, former tutee, need to plan a wedding together because their parents are getting married. And so they are planning the wedding in Belize. She's originally from there, so she knows the area better, but he's an event planner by trade. So they make a natural partnership. And so it's a bit of an enemies to lovers kind of a situation.
Very
Yeah.
exciting.
So I'm waiting on developmental edits. I shouldn't say waiting, because they will be coming. So I've got some developmental edits that are imminent for that one. Concurrently, I am writing a Christmas novella for an anthology that comes out this coming Christmas called Wreck My Halls. And each story, each novella is based on a Christmas carol or song. And then I just announced the next duology that I have with Harlequin's Afterglow imprint. And that book will be called Codename Gorgeous, and it features a spy undergoing sort of a heist and mystery solving and all of the good stuff from those kinds of from that kind of genre.
Oh, very cool.
So just a few things going on.
Lots of irons in the fire.
Yeah, for sure.
And Jodie, so you already kind of explained to us, we in the US are behind because you've already got lots of books available, which hopefully will be coming to us soon. What are you working on now?
So I've just sold my new book into the US. It will be coming out worldwide in May 2025. Well, I say worldwide. It will be here in ANZI, Australia, Aotearoa, New Zealand. It'll be in the US. It's in some European countries. It's in a lot more places than I've ever had a book before, which is very exciting. It's very loosely connected to this one through a background character. Like, you really have to squint. And I was like, oh, what's a world that I know really well? Because I had to pitch it when I was in the middle of doing edits for this one. And if anyone follows me on Instagram, they will know that editing this book was just an absolute nightmare. There are a couple of months of my life that I don't really remember. And so when I was pitching this book, I was like, okay, what do I have to do no research on? Academics. So it is an academic rivals to lovers marriage of convenience story with kind of like Anne and Gilbert vibes from Anne of Green Gables. It starts in Sydney, but it's mostly set in Hobart in Tasmania. So I actually spent a couple of years working at the University of Tasmania. So Tasmania is very near and dear to my heart. And I'm really excited to have this book set in kind of a very, very far away place for most people in the world, going out to more people in the world than any of my books ever have before.
Wow, very exciting. So much coming up. Okay, Billy informed me in a chat in the little message that I'm an idiot. I apologize. I don't do a lot of online stuff, that there is a separate Q&A from the chat room. So we're going to start with the questions that actually came in the appropriate spot, and then we'll move over to the ones in the chat room. But I think we have plenty of time for all of them. So our first question comes from, and I'm going to try really hard with names, Anissa. For all authors, what was the biggest hurdle that you had to clear to become a published author?
Well, I can talk to my own experience. I don't think there's anything I can say about getting published in Australia that will be in any way like a unique story about difficult to get it to being getting published. Let's start that again, Jodie. To getting published. The biggest hurdle I had to overcome getting published in the US, like I said before, was too Australian, which I had been hearing for a long time when I started writing this series. And so this book, Here for the Right Reasons, is the first one in this series. You can read them in any order, but it's technically number one. And so when I was writing it, I was thinking about another Australian author who's actually here at RWOz, Sally Thorne of The Hating Game. And when I read The Hating Game, it was so obvious to me. I just told this story on the Smart Bitches podcast the other week, if anyone listened to that. But it was so obvious to me that that book is set in Sydney. And Sally has never confirmed or denied this to me, but it's 100% set in Sydney. The Hating Game is set in Sydney. And then other people were like, no, it's London. No, it's New York. And then I reread it and I was like, oh, she never actually says where it's set. Maybe I could do that. And so in these books, I never actually come out and say that they're set in Australia, but I am clearly much, much worse at that maneuver than Sally Thorne, because everyone knew immediately. Whatever is too Australian about my books, I can't escape it by just never saying it is Australian. So I've just decided to give up on that now. And like I said, my new book is unashamedly and unabashedly set in Tasmania. So now that I have managed to kind of get my foot in the door of the US market, I'm hoping I won't hear too Australian again, because I don't know what it means and I don't know how to fix it.
There you go. Yeah, excellent, Jodie. Way to go. I'm relentlessly Canadian, as you are relentlessly Australian. That's right. Since I've interrupted, maybe I'll go next. I feel like in writing and publishing, there are endless hurdles, and the next one is always the biggest one. But I think in terms of my writing and publishing journey, the biggest hurdle was getting over myself. I think a lot of writers have always loved writing ever since they were very small, and they've been encouraged by teachers who've said you're very talented at writing. And the big hurdle for me was understanding that writing a book is a team sport. So you have your critique partners and beta readers, you have your agent, you have your editor, and all of them are actually brilliant people who can help you make a book better. And, you know, understanding that that you need help and can benefit from help was a huge thing for me. And learning how to take feedback gracefully and wisely is a really big thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think like the flip side of that, right, is also like knowing when to trust your gut. Because I think now that I'm like on like, you know, my second novel, my third book, sometimes I'll get feedback from my editor or my agent, and I'll be like, oh, but actually, no, I want to keep it as it is. Like sometimes you're just like, no, like I want to fight for this one.
Yeah.
And I think for me, the hardest part, yeah, the hardest part was like realizing that at a certain point people will read it. And to me, that was so like it hurt to know that, oh no, people will read this thing that I've kept, you know, like to like, because I really just kept it within my publishing team. And that's at a certain point, though, it was like, well, it's no longer just your book. It belongs, it's like the reader's books, and people will have good things to say about it or bad things to say about it. But that's how books work. And you can't, like, you don't have any control over that.
To, I think, round out the panel, for me, it's the promotion part of writing. So you know, there's a difference between being proud of what you're doing and bragging about what you're doing, right? And that was hard for me to reconcile for a while, because it was a very strong childhood principle instilled in us in our parents, like not to have too inflated an ego, but it's necessary to talk about what it is that you do when you're trying to promote, right? So I had to get over that a little bit. And also, hello to all of the introverts out there. I am a, you know, classic definition of introvert. I actually, for this most recent book, I started hashtagging things, promoting while introverting, so that people knew that I was, you know, really pushing myself to be out there and posting about the book and what I've got going on and all sorts of stuff like that. So that to me is the biggest hurdle.
Okay, so our next question's a little bit long, so hopefully I do it justice. This is from Nikki. And I'm going to use, it was written with eyes, so I'm going to use eyes, but this is not me. I write Black royalty romance set in a fictitious island nation in the Caribbean. Readers tell me how refreshing it is to read about a society that's like a mashup of Wakanda and Bridgerton set outside of Europe. My question is, what else can more mainstream indie authors do to help elevate marginalized BIPOC voices like mine?
Read and talk about the books and amplify them so that people hear about them in as many channels as possible.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's it, really. Talk about them.
Yeah, promotion is really, because I've definitely picked up books because I've seen an author that I like or follow recommend it, and I'm like, oh yeah, that looks really interesting.
I think as authors, and my co-panelists have covered it well, but as readers, I mean, what people attending this webinar can do is read with intentionality. I think it's pretty easy to just pick up whatever books are on the table in the bookstore, not really thinking about the representation on those tables. And I think we all could benefit from seeking out marginalized voices and reading them with the idea that we need to actually learn how to read marginalized voices. I made a thread a little while ago about how, you know, when you are marginalized as a person, your reading experience has always been that of a reader who's reading about somebody different than you. Like you I don't think I ever read a book about an autistic main character as a child. And so when you are a non-marginalized person reading a marginalized perspective, understand that it's going to be a bit different for you and keep going until you get the hang of it.
I think that's so true. As a bookseller, you know, I'm in a lot of groups with other booksellers, and so often one of the frustrations is, you know, we try to recommend books from all authors, right? And but we always, you do get the customers who come back who are like, why'd you recommend this book to me? You know, and it may fit every trope they like to read, but it may be a little bit harder to read a voice that's not comfortable to you. And, you know, if you put a book down after 40 pages because of that, in my opinion, as a reader, you're missing out, right? You missed out on all the rest. But yeah, it can be challenging to get people out of those comforting bubbles that they're used to reading in. So I think us booksellers have a lot to do to help get the marginalized and BIPOC voices out there to our readers as well. Especially, I'm in Northwest Ohio. Like, it's definitely not the most diverse area of readers. But, you know, I do find that I feel like it's part of my role as a bookstore employee to share those voices. So that was not the question, but I gave you an answer anyways. Okay, here's here's a good question from Melanie. What is your favorite book to recommend? Aside from your own. I'm going to add that to the end of the question.
Right now for me, it is a book called Love Unleashed by Melanie Sayward. She's only the second ever Indigenous Australian author to have traditionally published romantic comedy in Australia. She's a Bigambul and Waka Waka woman, and it's a book about a Bigambul woman named Bryn who goes to New York in hopes of making her dream career in publishing. But it turns out New York is actually pretty hard, and so she ends up working in a doggy daycare for a while. And spoiler, she falls in love. And it's a beautiful novel. It's an explosion of joy. It made me so happy to read. And I think it's probably a little bit difficult to access in the US, but it's worth going out of your way to get your hands on.
Thank you.
I'm currently, this is one of those questions, whenever someone asks me this, suddenly I'm like, I can't remember a single book I have ever read, ever. But right now I'm reading this Formula One romance book called Cross the Line by Simone Soltani. I actually have it right here. And it's like dual POV and it's really cute. And I'm a big F1 fan. And it's just, this was like, she was going to self-publish it, and then it picked up a lot of traction online. So now it's published in the US by Berkeley. And it's just really great, and I'm a fan. So if you're into sports romances, I don't know if that counts as an outdoor sports. I guess they are driving racing outdoors. But yeah, if you're into sports romances and you want to branch out of like ice hockey, then I love this book.
For me, it is usually the last book that I read because I very much resonate with sort of stumbling whenever I get asked this question. So for the last book that I read, it's by Mia Henselman called Trivialized Pursuit. She has a series that is based in gaming. So if you like board games, things like that, then definitely check those out.
Like Pyae, I have never read a book in my life. But I love to read nonfiction for inspiration. And the book that I read that I really loved and I think goes great with Rules for Second Chances is Sorry I'm Late, I Didn't Want to Come. And I am blanking on the author's name right now, but very easily Googleable. It's about an introvert who goes on a year-long mission to see what extroverting is like.
I'm blanking on the author's name too. It's an excellent book. I
have it on my bookshelf. Can I find it? Good question. Oh, you know what? It's behind my poster, so I don't want to mess with that. But I will remember it the second we get off the Zoom. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, as soon as you don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
Okay, from Joyce. Could any of the authors I think it's who have set a story in a location, especially international, the author has never been. How much creative license does an author give herself to create the location rather than traveling there and experiencing it directly?
Well, as someone who fits that description, I gave myself some license. I didn't really name places specifically because as someone who hadn't been to the location, I didn't want to inadvertently insult people or anything like that. But I did deeply research the areas, which sounds, I, I know it can sound a little funny that for contemporary romance, doing deep research into something, but that's just how I roll. And even to the point where I was plotting routes, dropping things into Google Maps and seeing whether or not that was a realistic way to go, things along those lines. So I didn't name anything, gave myself that license, but I did also at the same time, if anyone asked me specifically which locations they were based on, I could actually give them those locales.
And not to interrupt, it was mentioned in the chats. Jessica Pan is the author of Sorry I'm Late, but I Didn't Want to Come. And
Thank
there
you.
is a link in there is a link in the chat. There's a link in the chat for all of today's authors' books that you can get through bookshop.org. And there's also a link for the audio. But Billy just put a link for Sorry I'm Late, but I Didn't Want to Come as well. If anybody's looking for it, it's in the chats. So sorry to interrupt.
Oh, thank you so much. I need an external brain pretty much all the time these days. Okay, so in terms of research, I have to say writing rules for second chances during the pandemic, I did not want to get on a plane and go research this book. I live in central Canada, and even though and this book is set on the West Coast, so I grew up there, so I just picked a place I knew very well. So it may be sort of Whistler Pemberton, several decades out of date. But anytime that I could travel to a place and write it off, I would definitely do that. But I did give myself a lot of creative license to fictionalize it because of that research deficit. So who can say how realistic it is? Not I.
There was a follow-up question as well from, I think, Teme about how did you research your locations? And I just want to say, I think they're answering that question within this question, but if you need more information, feel free to add a follow-up question, Teme. Hopefully I'm saying your name right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was going to say, this is something that Australian authors have to face all the time because of the To Australian thing. Many Australian authors write stories set in, the UK, Regency UK in particular, or small town US is another big one, or just, various US full stop, because of this kind of idea that American readers won't want to buy books from places outside the US. How true that is, that's a whole thing. And Australia is pretty far from the rest of the world. So I think for Australian authors, if they were to jump on a plane and go and research, say, Montana every time they were going to set a book there, that would be a little bit expensive. But the authors I know who have been in this position do as much research as they possibly can, even if they can't get to, e.g., Montana.
Yeah, that was definitely a big reason why I set my book in Myanmar, in Yangon, because that was my hometown. And I did my undergrad in the Berkshires. So I know that part of the US kind of well. I've lived in London, but I don't know any place as well as I know my hometown. So I was like, well, I might as well, because I didn't want to be like MC, like you were saying about plotting on Google Maps and stuff. So I was like, well, I could just set it where I live and then hope that a US publisher will want it. And they did. So I was very happy with that. But yeah, no, Jodie, I definitely get what you mean of when I read books about places that are set in a small American town, I'm like, I can't write that because I don't know what that is.
Yeah, the other Australian authors that can write, e.g. Montana, I'm like, my hat's off to you. I don't think I could do it.
Okay, Sylvia asked, what was your favorite part of writing your books?
So for me, with this trilogy, they're all set on the same season of a reality dating show, The Bachelor, and it was plotting the season of The Bachelor that would happen within there. And if this season of reality television was ever made, it would legitimately be the most dramatic season ever. It would be such a good season of reality television. And in my academic life, I've written a lot about reality television. I think I'm up to 7, 8 articles about The Bachelor now. So getting to design my own Bachelor season filled me with joy.
I think for me it was just like having like because it was the first novel. Like now that I've written another one under contract with this one, I feel I know a lot of authors who have said like the joy of when you write your very first novel, it's just kind of never replicated because you're just kind of like it's like a whole new world. You're like a little kid. And I definitely felt like that. Like I just wanted to write it all the time. And also it was really fun because it's like I did something that is very it's like Hollywood glamour, like kind of, not entirely, but kind of like Crazy Rich Asians-y as well. So for me, it was like really fun to just write about this setting, this context that I've never been on a movie set, but it was really fun to like write about people who were and just be like, oh, this is just the world now.
Yeah. Much like Pia, I guess I would have to say that strangely enough, since this is a panel about location, my favorite thing about writing this book was writing the place. I wrote it in 2021. I was a frontline healthcare worker at the time, and my world had gotten very, very small. I went to the hospital and I went home. And so I really wanted to go home to where I had grown up. And so I just wrote a book there, and I put in like all my favorite places and all my favorite things to see. I put in my grandparents' cabin. It's the cabin in the woods in the book, and the sign on the door is real, like all the things that my heart really wanted. I just stuffed them into this book. So it was wonderful to do that.
Maggie, first and foremost, thank you for all of your efforts during that time because it was fraught. For me, I read a quote once and I am not going to be able to attribute it properly, but writing is, when I'm writing, it's the only time that I don't feel like there's something else that I should be doing. Like I have checklists and schedules and things like that for days. And so being able to immerse is a good way for me to just be very focused and not stressing about all of the other things that I'm supposed to be doing because writing is what I'm supposed to be doing. So it feels very cathartic that way. It's also, again, introversion, but I'm someone who like 5 minutes after the fact knows what I should have said. And so the act of writing really helps me rework those conversations and be able to actually express what I wish I had said, but didn't quite get around to.
Okay, we're back. And again, I hope I'm pronouncing this. I hope I'm pronouncing this name somewhat close. Tame. My brain wants to say team, but I really think it's got to be Tame. Has another question. Do you ever get stuck on what happens next, and how do you overcome it?
Yes.
For me, that definitely happened with my second book more, and and also if I did something bad, actually, now that I think about it, because now when you're on the other side, you're like, oh yeah, but like when you were in the middle of it, it's definitely like sometimes there were days where it was like, I don't know what's happening next for me. And I think maybe it's because my books have that more like thriller actiony aspect. I just kind of like will raise the stakes, and like if I get stuck, then I'm like, okay, let's throw in like a curveball and be like, how will they get out of this situation? So for me, it's like if I get stuck, I'm just like, okay, what if this thing goes wrong? Then what did they do? Is basically the question I ask.
Okay, and then we have, I think this might be the last question, but I'll scroll back through again in the comments to make sure I didn't miss anything. From Anissa, it says for Maggie, but I think as someone who's read all the books that are out, what was your favorite scene to write and why?
It's really hard to choose. I love the set pieces in the book. I wrote it as a romantic comedy, but it ended up a little sadder than that. So it's marketed as a contemporary romance. But the idea is the main character, Liz, loves romantic comedies and really watches them as a way to learn how people are expected to behave in particular circumstances. So the improv scenes are all built around classic romantic comedies. And I think my favorite was the one that was the Princess Bride scenario. So her husband turns up dressed as the Dread Pirate Roberts, and they're pretending that a muddy, buggy mountain trail is a pirate ship. And I just love how that scene goes, because as Pyae said, there was like a lot of twists in that scene where they end up, I won't spoil it, they end up in a perilous situation, and it's the first moment where the two characters understand that there is hope for their marriage. And it was a lot of fun to write, because like they're angry at each other, they're yelling, and then whoops, they're in each other's laps. So that's romance. We can't hear you, Denise. You're muted.
You're on mute.
Sorry, the store just opened and I didn't want to have too much background noise. Do any of the other authors have any thoughts about a favorite scene that you've written?
I have one. So in this book, Murray and Lily, the main character, convince a group of women on a season of The Bachelor to unionize and vote out The Bachelor instead of one of them being voted out. And that was a delight to write. That scene made me so happy. Actually,
have it right now.
Made me a Bachelor once.
For me, I think it would have to be the murder scene, just because it was just like, because I mean, it had me Googling some like sketchy things that I was like, I hope no one sees my search history. Like I was like, how fast does a body decompose in water? It was like, it was really fun.
One of my favorite scenes was the leeches or not scene, and I'll just leave it at that.
That was a good one. Okay, well, we are right at 11:02, so I think we did pretty well on our time, or at least 11:02 Eastern time, which I think is 11 was our scheduled end time. So thank you, authors. Thank you, participants. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, whether it's your Friday night or your Saturday morning. Thank you for taking time out to spend some time chatting about some wonderful, wonderful books. And I hope everyone gets a chance to read them. Again, there are links in the chat to get the books. There are links for both audio and physical, I think, and I'm guessing ebooks too, but I might have missed that one. And thank you to Bookstore Romance Day for putting on both this event and the full day and weekend events. There is also a link in the chat if you want to donate to Bookstore Romance Day. So thank you to Billy and everyone who helps put this day together. It's such a fun day to celebrate love. So any last thoughts, authors, before I say goodbye?
No, just thank you so much for having us.
Well,
it was really, really fun to be here.
So fun.
Hi, everyone. This is Billy from Bookstore Romance Day again, and I just want to thank Denise for moderating. Thank you to all of our authors for coming. Thank you to everyone in the audience who came to this first official Bookstore Romance Day panel for Bookstore Romance Day 2024. And everybody who registered for this event will be entered to win a credit bundle from Libro FM so that you can pick up a bunch of free audiobooks if you happen to be the winner. And thank you to our sponsors, Harlequin Trade, Avon, Epic Reads, Source Books, Bloom Books, St. Martin's Press Romance, and Bramble Books, and to our friends at Libro FM for donating so many audiobook gifts that we are giving away. Thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you at another future event. Goodbye.